Well, there's no more of them, number one. I mean, there'll never be another 63 Dodge or a 65 Chevelle or whatever. There's no more of them. But this is kind of like Fantasyland here, too. I mean, I don't know if this is the real world or not, just to be very honest with you.
They found a
Every legend starts in a place nobody expects, and Boyd Coddington's story starts in rural Rupert, Idaho, about as far from a chrome show floor as you can get. He wasn't born into money, and he wasn't born into the car world either. He was a machinist by trade, and for a stretch of his early life, he punched the clock at Disneyland during the day, then went home to tinker on cars at night in a home garage that looked like 1,000 other backyard setups across Southern California. Nothing about that routine screamed future icon. That's exactly the point. In 1977, Coddington opened his first real shop in Cypress, California. It was small, it was scrappy, and it had none of the mythology that would eventually surround it. What it did have was a machinist's obsession with tolerances, with things fitting the way they were supposed to fit. That obsession turned into an idea that would quietly reshape an entire industry. Billet aluminum wheels. Before Coddington, hot rod wheels were mostly chrome, mostly borrowed from earlier eras, mostly an afterthought. He treated the wheel itself as sculpture, machined from solid aluminum instead of cast. And that single decision became the visual signature of an entire generation of custom cars. If you have ever looked at a smooth, ultra-clean street rod from the late 80s or 90s and thought it looked almost like jewelry on wheels, you were looking at the aftershock of a machinist's habit that started in a home garage in Southern California. That's the part of the story most people already sort of know. The part that gets buried is what came next, and how close the whole thing came to falling apart more than once before it ever became a television phenomenon. There is one number that anchors everything else in Boyd Coddington's career, and it's a number that still hasn't been matched. The Grand National Roadster Show hands out an award called America's Most Beautiful Roadster, shortened by everyone in the industry to AMBR. It is judged by mechanics, designers, and historians who look at proportion, originality, and the quality of the actual fabrication, not just how a car looks under studio lights. Winning it once puts a builder's name in the history books permanently. Coddington's cars won it 7 times. 6 of those wins came back-to-back, one after another, from 1991 through 1996, a streak that nobody else in the show's history has matched before or since. Put that in perspective. That's not 7 different builders, each getting lucky once. That's one shop in one stretch of California, producing the single best car in the country's most competitive judging environment year after year after year, like clockwork. Judges, who had seen every trick in the book, kept handing the trophy back to the same address. It's worth sitting with how strange that is. A Roadster Show trophy isn't decided by ticket sales or popularity. It's decided by people whose entire job is spotting a poorly executed weld seam or a proportion that's a half-inch off. To win that panel's approval 6 years running means Coddington Shop wasn't just talented, it was operating with almost industrial consistency, turning out show-winning craftsmanship the way other shops turn out oil changes. That streak is also what turned Coddington from a very good hot rod builder into something closer to an institution. And institutions, once they exist, start attracting attention outside the world that built them. By the late 80s, Coddington Shop wasn't just building trophy winners, it was building cultural landmarks. In 1989, his team completed Cadzizilla, a radically reshaped 1948 Cadillac commissioned by Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top and designed by Larry Erickson. Cadzizilla looked less like a customized old Cadillac and more like a spaceship that had decided to borrow a fastback silhouette for the afternoon. It became one of the most photographed custom cars of its era, and it cemented the idea that a Coddington build wasn't just fast or flashy. It was a piece of design that belonged in a museum as much as a garage. Around that same era, Coddington's shop became something like a finishing school for the next generation of car designers. Chip Foose and Jesse James both spent time working under Coddington's roof before either of them had a television show of their own. Think about that for a second. 2 names that would go on to headline their own networks, running their own empires, both cut their teeth inside the same building, learning from the same exacting standards that had already produced 6 consecutive national trophies. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when a shop's culture is built entirely around a zero-tolerance approach to sloppy work. Coddington leaned into the business side just as hard as the craftsmanship side. He didn't just build wheels, he manufactured and sold them at scale, eventually taking his wheel company public on NASDAQ. A move almost unheard of for someone who started out machining parts in a home garage. For a while, it looked like the entire operation, the wheels, the shop, the reputation, was one seamless, self-reinforcing machine. The trophies sold the brand. The brand sold the wheels. The wheels funded the shop. The shop built more trophy winners. It's a clean story. It's also not the whole story. Here's the part that rarely makes it into the highlight reel. The same public wheel company that looked like Coddington's crowning business achievement eventually ran into serious financial trouble. Money got tight enough that Coddington had to restructure the business, selling off interest to another wheel manufacturer just to keep the operation alive. By 2001, things had gotten bad enough on the personal side of his finances that Coddington filed for personal bankruptcy protection, an attempt to manage debts that had been quietly piling up from his earlier ventures. Picture that timeline for a second. This is a man whose name was, by any measure, one of the most respected in an entire industry, a 7-time record holder, a builder whose cars hung in the Smithsonian. And at the same time that his public image kept climbing, his actual finances were unraveling behind the scenes. The shop that had produced 6 straight national champions was, at points, barely staying open. Then it got worse before it got better. In the early 2000s, California's Department of Motor Vehicles opened an investigation into a widespread pattern of title fraud within the custom car industry, involving practices where heavily rebuilt cars were registered using paperwork meant for the original, much older donor vehicle, letting builders and owners dodge emissions testing and certain taxes. Coddington's shop came under direct scrutiny. In April of 2005, he pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor charge tied to submitting fraudulent vehicle titles, paid a few $1,000s in restitution, and was ordered to perform community service, which, in one of the stranger footnotes of his career, involved him personally teaching other hot rod owners how to register their cars correctly. This is the piece of the story that gets almost entirely skipped when people talk about Coddington's legacy. He wasn't a myth who floated above the industry's problems, untouched. He was tangled up in the same messy financial and regulatory reality as everyone else building 6-figure cars out of a Southern California shop, and at more than one point, the whole operation nearly went under. The garage that would eventually be remembered as a shrine to precision had, not that long before, been a building where the lights nearly went out for good. Now here's where the story gets genuinely strange. And it's the part that most tellings of Coddington's career leave out entirely, probably because it doesn't fit the tidy narrative of an unbroken winning streak. During one of the roughest financial stretches for Coddington's operation, a builder named Ron Whiteside had been working on a 1934 Ford 3-window project and brought it to Coddington's shop, hoping to finish it into a Riddler-caliber contender. While that car was still in progress, a designer working in the shop at the time, Chip Foose, saw the same reference photos and sketched out a sister car, a 1934 Roadster, for a different client. Both projects were, in a sense, born out of the same creative moment inside Coddington's walls. But then Coddington's wheel business ran into the wall we just talked about, and his shop closed. The Whiteside Roadster, unfinished, sitting mid-build, ended up being sold off at auction rather than completed under Coddington's name. A buyer named Richard Berg purchased the incomplete project and finished it himself, eventually naming the completed car Impact. In 2001, Impact was entered into the Grand National Roadster Show. It won America's Most Beautiful Roadster. Sit with that for a second, because it's one of the strangest ironies in the entire history of that award. A car that began its life inside Boyd Coddington's shop during the exact period his empire was cracking under financial pressure, left that shop unfinished, got picked up by someone else entirely, and went on to claim the very trophy that had defined Coddington's own legend for a decade. The DNA of his shop's design language won the award again, just not under his name, and not while his own operation was in any position to claim it. That's the kind of detail that never makes it into a highlight reel, because it complicates the story instead of simplifying it. It doesn't fit neatly into greatest builder of all time or cautionary tale of financial collapse. It's both at once. A half-finished car, born out of Coddington's shop during its worst chapter, walked out the door, and finished the job somewhere else. Coddington's health had been declining for years by the time American Hot Rod made him a household name on Discovery, starting in January of 2004. Viewers who tuned and saw a gruff, exacting boss pushing his crew toward impossible deadlines. And the show worked precisely because that pressure was real, not staged for cameras. What the show couldn't capture, because it wasn't the kind of thing you put in a reality series, was a business that had already survived bankruptcy, a criminal plea, and the quiet departure of a car that would go on to win his signature trophy without him. Coddington was hospitalized at the very end of December 2007, discharged briefly, then readmitted to Presbyterian Intercommunity Hospital in Whittier, California, where doctors performed surgery. Despite an initially hopeful prognosis, he died on February 27, 2008, from complications tied to long-term diabetes. He was 63 years old. His wife and son kept parts of the business running afterward, including the wheel company, while the hot rod shop itself struggled under the debt it had carried for years. So what was actually sitting inside Boyd Coddington's garage by the time it was finally emptied out? Not a mystery, not hidden treasure. What was really there was the physical evidence of a career that refused to be just one thing. The same address had produced 6 consecutive national championships and also nearly gone bankrupt twice. It had built a Cadillac that ended up defining an era of custom design and also generated a criminal investigation into fraudulent paperwork. It had trained 2 future television stars and also let one of its own unfinished creations slip away to win the shop's signature trophy under somebody else's name. That's the real secret Coddington took to the grave, not because he was hiding it, but because nobody wanted to tell a legend story with the messy parts left in. The garage wasn't a shrine. It was a workshop that had lived through triumph and collapse in almost the same breath, over and over, for 3 decades. The 7 trophies are real. The billet wheel revolution is real. So is the bankruptcy. So is the plea deal. And so is the roadster that got away and won anyway. Maybe that's the more honest way to remember him. Not as an untouchable genius whose garage held nothing but polished perfection, but as a machinist from rural Idaho who built an empire, nearly lost it more than once, and still left behind a body of work that keeps outrunning every attempt to sum it up in one sentence. Which part of that surprised you more, the 6-year winning streak, or the unfinished car that won the trophy without him? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.